co-joining me with a bit of not so fast, not so slow, a little bit of a whisper, a little bit of soft-spoken ASMR, probably mostly soft-spoken, if that is your jazz. I am going to be reading some no-sleep scary stories from Reddit, from the subreddit nosleep, after someone commented that I do it, and honestly, I love scary stories, especially before bed. I don't know why. I'm weird like that, but I grew up doing this. I don't even know where I used to read scary stories from before bed when I was a kid, but I did. And so, I've chosen a few stories that were on the main page, and they seem to be the most, highest rated ones, in that they have a lot of upvotes. So, let's go ahead and begin, shall we? I'm going to be looking over to the side because I'm reading off of my laptop and filming with my camera phone. My phone camera. So, this first one is called My Family Doesn't Eat Meat After 6 p.m. Because of the Consequence. My family doesn't eat meat after 6 p.m. I'd always thought this was normal, that other families followed this seemingly basic principle. It wasn't until I moved out that I learned how weird of a thing this was, that other families didn't adhere to what I had always thought to be a fundamental dietary guideline. Only my family believed in the consequence. For nearly 2 decades, I refrained from eating meat after the clock struck 6, regardless of how much of a craving for notification, sorry, too distracting. No matter how much of a craving I happened to have for it, even if there was plenty left and I hadn't finished my plate, I was expected to either scrape the remains into the trash, so much food wasted, or put it in a Tupperware container for the next day. I always tried to get home soon enough to eat dinner before then, but with school and extracurricular activities, that wasn't always possible. I remember when I'd just finished hosting a session for an after-school club and was on my way home, starving, hadn't eaten all day, when I got a text from my father saying that he had bundled all the meat up and to not expect any left out. He'd sent the text at 5:47 p.m. I'd arrived home feeling disappointed, but quickly got over it as it was simply something that had to be done. It was, for us, normal. The fear of the consequence guided our lives. Did I say before that I haven't read these yet, just like with my previous story video? So, I'm on the edge of my seat just like you, because of how integral it was to my family. I'd never once brought up the topic with friends, much like how you probably wouldn't bring up the fact that you put your dishes in the sink or dishwasher, it was never conversationally relevant to bring up our no meat after six rule. To me, it was mundane and unremarkable. Sorry, I lost my place there for a second. It might sound like this was odd, though, ultimately harmless restriction, a familial eccentricity, which many families have in one way or another. And in one way, you're right, I wasn't abused. I slipped up once, and while it was treated gravely, given a stern, though not frighteningly heated warning, there was no traumatic punishment, physical or otherwise. There was some leniency in the exaction of the consequence with regards to children, but the consequence itself was so utterly bizarre, so needlessly grim, that its very existence made the whole thing unforgivable. I would have rather been raised vegan, lived a life bereft of meat for some allegedly noble cause, than the one I had, because that knowledge, that ever-lurking fear, messed me up in other ways. I don't have PTSD, and neither do I have some psychological block preventing me from eating meat after 6 p.m., thank God. But I do have knowledge of the consequence, and I'd do anything to forget it. When I shared that knowledge with my girlfriend, and how I still adhered to it, something she hadn't consciously noticed, she left me. Not only did she leave me, she called me a lunatic. Me, who had never once said anything certifiably crazy. Me, who treated her with care, respect, and kindness, with an unblemished record of staunch sanity. All because of the fucking consequence. She left yesterday, and in doing so, all over the things from my apartment, which included, in doing so, took all of her things from my apartment, which included most of the cookware, since she'd brought hers over in the absence of my own. I'd relied on the microwave and an air fryer prior to her moving in. Back to such lowly states, I bought a hot pocket after an unusually exhausting day at work, that olden dinner which may have relied throughout the ages. Cheeseburger flavor. Additionally, I bought a bag of those low-fat air-fried chicken tenders to supplement the totally nutritious meal. I was physically tired and emotionally wrecked. I'm sorry. To me, I'm just finding this funny at the moment, but it probably will get scary. I guess in the grief of my heartbreak, I thought it was worth to share the events with my cousin during the drive home, with whom I'd felt a close brotherly connection. Well, he apparently felt it necessary to tell my parents after the call ended, who took it upon themselves to come visit me. While sitting at my small dinner table, eating my hot pocket and tendies, there came a few knocks at the door to my apartment. I got up, answered, and bewildered let my parents in. My mom hugged me, my dad gave me a knowing and solemn pat on the shoulder, and told me in many words that I'd be fine, and that I'd find someone better. Absent-mindedly, I brought them into the kitchen and offered them some tenders, since I'd cooked the whole bag. I hadn't paid attention to the time. Ironically, hadn't thought of the one thing that ended my relationship. My mom's face was the first to change. It went from sympathetically despondent to confused and then horrified. My dad's reaction was a little belated, as if he couldn't quite fathom the events. His expression of fatherly contrition slowly melted into a snarl, a visage of mounting contempt. Finally glancing over at the microwave's clock, I'd realized what I'd done. Speechless, my mother merely stood at the threshold of the kitchen. My father, equally voiceless, gently pushed past her and headed toward the front door. I heard the lock click, and then he returned, his face grimly set, a resolute. Stunned, I sat there at the table, the cheap meat churning in my in my gut, in my plate, the half-eaten hot pocket, and chicken tender crumbs suddenly seemed like a profane thing. I wanted to sweep it off the table. After guiding my mother to a seat, my father went and leaned against the kitchen counter, his hands clasped together. He looked like a pastor in prayer, his posture almost reverent. A terrible, baleful silence fell upon the kitchen, like the sudden hush of an audience before a public execution. Oh, my son, my baby. My mother's shaky voice almost broke me. I met her eyes. She averted them, like she couldn't bear to look at me, her own son. I tried to apologize, but my mouth was suddenly dry. The room suddenly felt hot, stifling. I couldn't seem to breathe, let alone form the words. Slowly things started to feel wrong. Anxiety reared itself like a massive wave. My vision swam, objects becoming blurred, indistinct, amorphous. My own parents became like phantoms, shifting and immaterial. I gripped the table for balance, for stability, as if I am the one losing corporeality. It's happening to my son, oh my God. I'd never heard my father sound so defeated. His voice almost brought me back, almost reversed the nauseating unreality of my sudden affliction. In my mounting delirium, my mother's whimpering sounded almost musical, sing-song, like a lullaby. She'd whisper, sing to me as a child. When I felt my face begin to slide free from my skull, I screamed, but it was altered, distorted as my lips came loose, as my tongue followed in their wake, as if taking on the burden. My mother let out a scream of her own. To me, the world was now no more than a kaleidoscopic maelstrom of images, one of which was my maniacally shrieking mother. The rest of my body fell apart in turn. Bits crumbled away, layers slid off, fluids leaked and oozed. When those finally just my skeleton, held together by strips and stubborn sinew, my father began cleaning up the mess. My mother's mind was pretty much gone. She'd screamed herself senseless, unable to move, lacking the connective tissue to do so. I just sat and watched as my remains were collected and deposited into a bucket he'd gotten from beneath my sink. The stuff, the meat, was then slowly poured into the sink. The grinding and gurgling of the garbage disposal as it worked to break up my flesh somehow calmed me. Would have soothed my nerves if I'd still had them. When the deed was done, he lifted my bony hand and placed it gently on the table, then did the same with the other. I could only watch. My eyes hadn't withered away. He then shuffled around the kitchen, and not finding what he was looking for, went searching throughout the apartment. I couldn't guide him, not that I would have. I knew what he was searching for, and the last thing I wanted was for him to find it. But he found it eventually. He set the toolbox on the kitchen table as if it were the most delicate thing in the world. It was old. It had been his, but it was sturdy, and the tools inside hadn't been used once since he'd gifted them to me. With both hands, as if they were precious jewels inside, he raised the lid and removed the hammer and a few nails. He raised the hammer, then lowered it, and helped my mother out of her chair. He led her to my couch and returned, his expression pained, but set. He was ready, no matter how much it would hurt him and me. A nail was placed atop my left hand. The hammer struck once, twice. A second nail was placed on my right hand and was embedded to its head with 3 solid, table-shaking strikes. There was somehow pain, although that was left Although that was left of me was bone, some flimsy pieces of dead flesh, and somehow I felt it. More than just a vibration, I actually felt the puncturing of the bone, the fracturing of my hand, some phantom skin sensation. I fixed to the table in a seated crucifixion. I was a prisoner. I knew that I had every right to be given what I'd done. What would I do if I were free? And yet I was terrified, appalled by my father's eyes, by what I had become, by what he'd done to me without so much as a few calming words. The sink of my discarded ground flesh lingered, wafted up from the garbage disposal, the viscera still clinging to the pipes. I wanted to cry, wanted to scream, but I could only stare and suffer. And then the urge came, insidious and powerful, like a switch had been flipped in my brain, the newly emergent psyche, demanding that I perform the unthinkable. It galvanized me, made my bones pulse and quiver. They rattled in place, and I heard my mother moan in fright. My father sat across from me, watching me with hammer in hand, and I torn between minds, one terrified, the other unthinking, save for that deplorable impulse, stared back. That abysmal silence returned when my skin began to grow back. The urge increased by magnitudes. I nearly lost myself completely to that abominable impulse. My parents left around the time that my face finished reconstituting itself. It felt new, so I'm sure it looked incredibly uncanny, probably more unnerving than the skeleton they'd stared at for nearly an hour. I thought I'd die when the skin formed around my hands, when those new nerves, excited to sense and feel, when fairly bombarded by the sudden, inexpressibly excruciating sensation of those long nails in my hands. I let my mind mold myself, I withdrew into an unthinking fugue. Even after I'd finished regenerating, I sat there for 20, 30 minutes, dreading to rip out the nails, to bring even greater agony upon myself, but I had to, and I did. Thank God I didn't have the voice for the pain, that my vocal cords hadn't yet grown taut enough to handle the sodic burden. I would have thought I would have brought the whole complex running to my door with my screams. I know that had my father not done that, I would have done far worse to someone else, as something worse than a ghoul, as some kind of fleshless revenant. I would have gone on a monstrous prowl, would have seized and devoured someone long ago, centuries before my birth. Some far distant ancestor committed atrocities against a few townspeople in some long forgotten village, either out of extreme desperation in dire circumstances, or simple sadistic gluttony. I never found out why. I just know that he committed terrible anthropophagic crimes, cannibalized multiple people. The people related to those he'd heard were so devastated and subsequently filled with wrath that they employed all manner of curses and maledictions, dooming him and his kin forever and ever to unforeseeable and unpreventable malignancies. I can't say that word. Malignancies and restrictions. Consequences related to the consumption of meat. Not long after an entire generation was rendered gastrointestinally with all these words, gastrointestinally incompatible with meat. Others down the line had been able to eat and not get full, no matter the quality or content. I don't think I could have lived with that polyphagic plague, not for long. My family, our consequence, for whatever reason, we cannot eat meat after 6 p.m., lest we shed our flesh and transform into hyper-ravenous fiends, skeletal nightmares who would prey on friend, foe, or family in a frenzy of insatiable hunger, unless we're detained, starved for a period of time, dependent upon factors seemingly beyond our control. For some, it's hours, others days, but the body eventually regenerates, and our humanity afterwards is, for the moment, restored. I'd never succumbed to that despicable, horrific state before. It was the most awful thing that had ever happened to me. Now, no matter the circumstance, I'll never forget the consequence. It's not something I can afford to overlook or gamble with. I tried to read that as best I could, but this person who wrote this, damn, very academic. Yeah, I'm sorry if my lapses, my mistakes in reading might have thrown you off a bit from the story, and it was hard for me to take it seriously. I didn't find that scary at all. What about you? I honestly don't know much about this subreddit. I thought it was just scary stories, but the people in the comments, I literally was gonna ask that. So I'm reading the comments now. And someone commented, how does the cutoff work with daylight savings times? I'm sorry. It's just too funny. This is like, people are taking it quite seriously and saying, oh wow, you know, your family got unlucky. And yeah, this is when does it stop being after 6 p.m.? I mean, I people are just making all these speculations. I'm like, honestly, I laughed way too much here. How does this work with time zones? Just 6 in that time zone? Because of course, I'm not sure, but I think daylight savings time is only in North America. But then there's like in the UK, there's British summertime and not British summertime. But in Japan, there's nothing like that. So I don't know. I'm sorry. I didn't find that funny. I didn't find it scary. My apologies. Yeah. Shall we read another? We're at 27 minutes. Look at that. Let's see. I have I was gonna say posted, and then I said put a few. Like open. Okay, I'll read. I think I can read like 2 more. These aren't too long. I have about 3 more open, but one of them is particularly long. Of course, I'll do part 2 if this is popular at all. But this is somewhat related to meat. Okay, let's get back into the serious. That was my watch. Serious, scary mode. Yes, very serious. Very, very serious. Okay. I don't know why I sounded like that, but anyway. Okay. So, the next story is titled If Missing Livestock Returns, Kill It Immediately. When I was 23, I had a security gig at a dairy farm outside of Delphos, Ohio. It was a modest place, only holding a few dozen cows. At any given time, my then co-worker, a 34-year-old recovering meth addict named Corey, it's actually naming him. I imagine these must all be completely made up. I'm sorry to go off a tangent, but apparently, no sleep is a place for predators to share their scary personal experiences. So, yeah. Anyway, I digress. My then co-worker, 34-year-old recovering meth addict named Corey, had just been fired for letting a cow go missing on his watch. A fireable offense in every sense of the word. For starters, Corey was insane. By the time I'd met him, drug-induced psychosis had rendered him virtually schizophrenic. On long nights during late rain period, he'd tell me about his CIA. He'd tell me about CIA agents that were out to get him. He was convinced that they were broadcasting thoughts into his head via electromagnetic waves, and that they would stop at nothing to ruin his life. More than once, I'd catch him glancing over his shoulder, peeking out of windows with a dumb look on his face, hoping to catch a glimpse of whoever was following him. That's the type of person Corey was. Each of our cows had an ear tag labeled with a number. At 8 p.m., they were each to be guided into their own respective stalls and locked in for the night. Padlocks became the norm after an incident with local kids a few years earlier. In the mornings, we'd have to carry around a clipboard containing each lock combination and individually release each one. It made for an annoying way to start the day, but the cows were a hell of a lot more secure that way. That's what made Corey's story so unbelievable. He had claimed that the previous night, cow number 29 had been locked away in her stall, along with the others. He told us that the only thing out of the ordinary that night was an obnoxious bat stuck in the rafters that he planned to deal with in the morning. In order for his claim to be true, an intruder would have had to unlock the barn with a set of keys, unlock 29 stall with the correct combination, then reset both of the locks and leave undetected. Either that or they picked up a 1,600-pound animal and leaped through a window. Considering Corey's nasty habit of abandoning his duties in order to twitch and hallucinate in the corner, a small part of me believed that some two-bit thief might have been able to get one over on him. My boss, however, a 50-year-old hothead, concluded that Corey must have been involved with the cow's disappearance and promptly kicked him to the curb. With nobody else to fill his position, my boss had offered to pay me extra for each of his duties that I could complete till he received a new hire. Naturally, I agreed. I'd be heading back to school in a few weeks, and we needed all the money I could get. Not we needed. My first night back at work began normally, since I'd now be doing the work of 2 security guards. I'd arrived early to get a head start on Corey's checklist. I started by sweeping out the barn. Farmhands tried to keep the TMR in a long pile just in front of the stall doors so the cows could eat throughout the night. But that shit practically painted the floor by the time I got there. Midway through, I noticed something reflective in the corner of the barn. I'd lazily swept a loose bit of corn and hay over to it to investigate. On the floor before me was a neon yellow ear tag. I picked it up to examine it. 29. Next to 29's ear tag were the skeletal remains of a bat. I guess that was just another thing that Corey never got around to dealing with. I swept up the bones along with the rest of the barn. By the time I was finished, it was already 8 p.m. I made my way out to the fields, and then one at a time, I guided each cow walked to its assigned stall. I got through about 10 or so before I noticed something strange. Across the field, about 50 meters away from the others, was a lone cow. It faced away from me, seemingly transfixed on a nearby cornfield. Seeing a cow on its own is nothing strange in and of itself. They need personal space the same as people do. What was strange was the way that her tail stuck straight out from behind her, unwavering. She stood as if she were afraid to slip, with her feet planted far apart, perhaps the strangest of all. Her head appeared to be tilted at a 90-degree angle. I wasn't eager to tell my boss. They'd put down many sick cows before, but losing two in the matter of a week might have been enough to send him over the edge. I decided to save that cow for last as I continued to guide the rest of them inside for the night. Being in charge of twice the amount of cows I was used to was time consuming. It took me nearly an hour to round them up. By the time I'd locked number 36 for the night, it was 9 o'clock. I should have been making my rounds by then, especially given the circumstances. I just had that last cow to deal with. Sorry if you heard my rumbling stomach. Anyway, while contemplating how long it was going to take me to unlock each cow in the morning, I realized something that made my blood run cold. The only stall left empty, was number 29. I shuffled to the field. Surely enough, she was there. She hadn't moved an inch since I'd started the process of moving them. I approached her slowly. It was surreal, seeing a creature frozen in such an odd position. As I came upon her, I could hear a definite but muffled chittering. It was unlike any noise I'd ever heard from a cow. What the fuck did you eat? I thought to myself. I whistled to the cow before approaching her to avoid startling her. On a dime, the chittering ceased. The cow's left ear rose to face the sky. It began to oscillate rhythmically like the periscope of a submarine. I could tell that moving this one would be a challenge. I rubbed her back in an attempt to soothe her. Bonding is key when establishing any sort of relationship with an animal. I'd never interacted with 29 before, so we were unfamiliar with each other. Her skin felt bizarre, like clay with hide draped over it. I walked around to see her face. Her eyes were peeled open, darting around rapidly. Her mouth hung open and drooped to the side. I examined her left ear, searching for a place to reinsert her tag, but there was no piercing. I strapped a halter to 29's mouth and began to lead her. It was like trying to uproot a tree with a bike chain. Each tug I gave was fruitless. I began to put my weight into it, but still no luck. And when I say no luck, I don't mean that 29 wouldn't follow me. I mean that her body showed zero sign of being affected by my body weight whatsoever. Cows are strong creatures, but they're not made of stone. I was perplexed. After 15 minutes of this, I decided that it was useless to continue on. With the clock ever ticking, I could no longer afford to neglect my rounds. I began to walk to the security post to collect my flashlight and get on with the night. As I pondered my life choices, whilst dancing my way through a minefield of cow patties, I heard a slow trotting. I looked behind me to see that the cow had in fact moved. 29 was now facing me. Not so shy now, I wondered. I turned around and continued walking to the gate. When I made it halfway through the field, I began to hear the trotting again. It was louder and much quicker this time. I smiled to myself. Wish I'd known to walk away sooner. Without turning to face the cow, I walked into the barn and began fumbling with 29's padlock. 3 left, 32 right, 23 left. As the clock clicked open, I heard the floorboards behind me creak. A slow, vocal, droning noise turned to a sickly gurgle. I hope to God whatever you've got isn't contagious, I said before spinning around. All color drained from my face as I was greeted with the sight of the 8-foot-tall beast standing before me on its hind legs. 29's head was cocked sideways, with one eye focused on me. Its pupils seemed to grow and shrink rapidly as it scanned over my entire body. Its lower jaw slowly moved up and down as it began to vocalize again. It began to creep towards me. Its front legs kicked wildly as it attempted to keep balance, all the while making that same noise. I began to feel lightheaded. I grabbed 29's padlock and made a break for the door. The cow began to rapidly stomp behind me. I began to hyperventilate as I sprinted. The rest of the cows were spooked, shaking and jumping around wildly. I slammed the door shut and clasped the padlock. A sickening boom shook the entire wall of the barn as 29 began to claw at the door. The beast croaked before chittering once more. I backed away from the door slowly, its wooden frame bending and contorting at the sheer force behind it. Without another warning, I turned my back to the barn and ran to my car as 29 began wailing and pounding. I never ended up making any rounds that night. Instead, I started my car and left that place in the rearview mirror. I didn't tell my boss. In fact, I deliberately avoided several of his phone calls because I had nothing to say. I figured it'd be best if I quit the easy way. There are certain things in life that back you into corners. Silence forces your hand, you know. That's why I'm writing this now. Of course, I still wanted my money. A few weeks later, just before making my 2-hour commute back to college, I stopped by the farm to pick up my final check. My boss wasn't in his office on Tuesdays, so I took advantage the situation and granted myself access. With the key that I'd seen him not so stealthily kick under the rug once or twice. After snagging my check and a few jolly ranches, I got in my car and slowly began to drive away. Out of the corner of my eye, a young farmhand standing in the grazing field caught my attention. "Hey, kid," I shouted, "stay away from the night shift." But he didn't answer me, nor even look at me. He just continued to stare at the pile of bones before him. I don't know if I found that scary, but interesting. I like to see what the other people are saying in the comments. I love how a lot of these people just take it so seriously, these stories. It's great. Okay, I'm gonna change my position a little bit. I thought I would be kind of cozy sitting under my kotatsu table and reading. But unfortunately, it's a little bit uncomfortable. So, for my final story, I will be facing this way. With my little comfy, cozy puppy pillow. So, let's see. This kind of feels like we're just having a sleepover. You know? Reading each other scary stories. So, let's read our final one of the night. This one is titled, "I Guide Tours at a Haunted Hotel. I found something I wasn't meant to see." The Stanley. You might have heard of it. It's a hotel in Estes Park, Colorado. Most famous for hosting a stay from Stephen King decades ago. Turns out he liked it so much, he ended up using it as the inspiration for a book you've almost definitely heard of, The Shining. Nice. The story goes, he came in the winter, and the staff was already prepared to leave for the colder months. He courted a few drinks in our huge, empty hotel. While the bartender served him ghost stories, a little while later, voila, here's Johnny. People come from all over the country hoping to find a ghost. My job is to tell you where to find them. I guide tours around the campus, telling people the rehearsed, memorized stories about women who laugh and dogs that curl into your bed at night. And I'm good at it. I started last autumn, but I took to the job quickly. I'll make scary faces. I'll make eye contact with you. I'll use old passages guests don't even know about. popping out in front of you in places you didn't think I could be. A couple of weeks ago, I stayed overnight at the hotel for the first time. I worked double. My apologies. I decided to change my position again. Last time, I promise. So, I worked a double. The room was available, and I had to open again the next day, so it just made sense. It was fun. The rooms are old, and there's a small gap at the top of the doors. At any other hotel, there would be complaints, but at the Stanley, it's part of the experience. You'll hear it all, every creak of the floorboards, every door opening and closing, every doorknob twisting. It's all too easy to let your mind turn an insomniac neighbor into a ghost. And let's be honest, nobody comes to the Stanley for a good night's sleep. I haven't gone home since that night. Most of the employees are teens from Estes Park, looking for some extra cash on the weekends, so the turnover is high. When my bosses saw me as the reliable worker I am, they gave me a standing offer to work whenever I want, so I've worked every day. The last building we visit on my tour is a tiny, shambled building at the back edge of campus. It's not really supposed to be part of the experience. Often I'll skip it entirely. But on the tours, when we moved a little too quickly and I needed something to fill the last few minutes. At the hour the guests paid for, I'd pop in. It's a creaky old building that's been under construction for the entire time I've worked here. I've never once seen crews come in or out of it. Inside, a collection of old antiques welcomes you into the narrow entranceway from its only windowsill. Past that, a single hallway runs past two rooms, one on each side of the hallway, until it meets its end at a locked doorway. Broken old appliances and heaps of lumber and sawdust littered the old rooms, and it was really nothing special, but the air pressure inside is strange, and sometimes that causes the doors to move, which is usually enough to warrant an ear-splitting shriek or two. I used that to make up some fun, spooky stories about it. The one that seems to perform the best is about a ghost who will lock the door from behind us, from the outside. If that happens, don't panic, I'd say. Tapping my radio, all I have to do is call and someone will come let us out. There was a little truth to that. I don't have any key to this building. Nobody ever locked it anyway. Funnily enough, though, someone did lock the door at the end of the hallway. I asked about the key once, at the risk of having my secret tour stop discovered, but nobody even seemed to know what I was talking about. I always used to wonder what was in there that would be so important. My best guess was some kind of valuable movie memorabilia. I was wrong. Sometimes on my tours, while guests were taking pictures, people would tell me I had disappeared from their photos, and it was true. In a lot of the pictures people showed me, you could see a portion of a blurred, half-transparent figure or a portion of my face, or my clothing hiding in the background of their shots. Sometimes half my body would be there, and the other half vanished. It's easy enough to explain. Some cameras are still not so great at capturing motion, but guests at the Stanley live for that stuff, so I usually play into it. It wasn't easy to explain anymore the first time I phased through an object. I was reading, and when I tried to turn the page, I missed. That's all it was, a mild, private embarrassment, highlighting a severe lack of depth perception. A silly and forgettable moment until I missed again a second later. Then again, no matter how many times I tried to pinch the page, I would watch the tip of my index finger pass right through the paper. I blamed it on sleep deprivation at first, but the more it happened, the more I struggled to find rational explanations. Forks, hairbrushes, makeup, more and more things were falling out of my grasp, through my fingers, through my hands even. Everything culminated 2 mornings ago when I couldn't grab the doorknob to leave my room. I convinced myself I was leaving my mind, losing my mind. Convinced all I needed to do was focus harder, just grab the damn doorknob. But each time, my hand would pass right through it like I was missed. In a moment of frustration and exhaustion, I screamed and banged my fists against the door. I passed right through it. I nearly toppled down the stairs just outside my room. I looked back. The door was still closed. I couldn't believe it. I wouldn't. I didn't want to. Ghosts aren't real. I told my boss that afternoon that day would be my last for a while. I needed a break. I needed time away from the hotel. Some fresh air, some warmer air for a while, somewhere warmer for a while. My ability to grab things came and went throughout the day. I started encouraging the guests to open the doors themselves. They liked it. It added to the scare if they had to lead themselves through the passages. They had no idea it was because I was too scared to find out if I could open the door myself. That evening, at the end of the last tour of the night, we ended at the old run-down house. It was the first time I'd been there that day. It's more common for my tours to end there at night, probably because I'm antsy to be done for the day and rush the later tours. I hadn't been able to grab anything that entire tour. I was letting the last few lingering tourists out of the building when the door at the end of the hall caught my eye. I couldn't help it. I had to know. My heart beat faster as I took my first step towards the door. I don't know why. I'd been in the room 1,000 times, but this felt different. Was I about to discover the last secret of the Stanley Hotel? Did I even want to? I took a few more steps, passing the first doorway on the left. The door slammed shut. I screamed, "Damn it, pull yourself together." I resisted an impulse to slap myself, for no other reason than to imitate the cartoons I watched as a kid. I passed the next doorway, braced for it to close at any second. Nothing. I glanced in as I passed it. Piles of junk appliances and strips of plywood, plastered, flickering silhouettes of imaginary monsters onto the drywall. My eyes turned and focused on the last door. The room was silent, not even a single creak from the floorboards beneath my feet. I reached the door and raised a hand, outstretching a single finger towards the top lock. The tip passed right through. I held in a gasp and pushed my finger further into the doorway. Soon, my entire finger vanished behind the metal door. couldn't resist. I pushed farther. My hand followed, then my wrist, then my arm. As far as I could manage, I took a step. My foot passed through it as well. Another step, and I was through. The room was nearly completely dark. I could make out a few shapes, a series of lumps that looked like piled boxes around the floor. Something stuck out in front of them, something long. I bent out closer. My eyes slowly adjusted to the dark. I could make out a little more. Legs, human legs. My stomach caught in my throat. I followed the limbs up higher. With my eyes, the torso slumped at a severe angle, trying to collapse fully to the floor, but half caught on the boxes behind it. Then I saw her face, and I screamed, not because she was dead, but because she was me.